This virus can kill up to 90% of the people it infects, yet most of the world only hears about it during outbreaks. Today, you're going to understand what Ebola really is and why it still matters. What is Ebola? Ebola is a rare but extremely deadly virus that most people only hear about when there's a major outbreak in the news. But have you ever stopped to think about what Ebola actually is? It's not a new virus, and it's not something that appeared overnight. Ebola was first identified in 1976 in Central Africa, and since then, scientists have been studying it to understand why it is so dangerous to the human body. When Ebola infects a person, it causes a severe illness known as Ebola virus disease. In the early stages, the symptoms can look like many other infections: fever, headache, weakness, and muscle pain. This is part of what makes Ebola so frightening. At first, it doesn't seem different from a normal illness. Can you imagine how difficult it must be to recognize something so deadly when it starts out looking so common? As the disease progresses, Ebola can begin to attack multiple organs at the same time. People may develop vomiting, diarrhea, internal bleeding, and organ failure. This rapid and aggressive progression is what makes Ebola one of the most dangerous viruses known. When you hear about high fatality rates, this is why. The body is overwhelmed very quickly if treatment does not begin early. Another important thing to understand is that Ebola is not everywhere in the world. Most outbreaks have happened in specific regions of Africa, often in communities with limited access to health care. This raises an important question. What would happen if the same virus appeared in places with fewer resources to respond quickly? That's one of the reasons global health organizations take Ebola so seriously, even when outbreaks seem far away from most people watching this video. So when we talk about Ebola, we're not just talking about a virus. We're talking about how vulnerable humans can be to infectious diseases, especially when information, healthcare, and resources are limited. And now that you know what Ebola really is, ask yourself, how many other dangerous viruses exist that most of us only learn about when it's already too late? How does Ebola spread? One of the biggest fears people have about Ebola is the idea that it spreads easily through the air like the flu or COVID-19. But here's the truth. Ebola does not spread through the air. This is a really important point to understand. The virus requires direct contact to be transmitted. So ask yourself, how often are you actually in contact with someone's blood or bodily fluids in your daily life? Ebola spreads through direct contact with the blood or body fluids of an infected person, including vomit, diarrhea, saliva, sweat, urine, and even tears. It can also be transmitted through objects that are contaminated with these fluids, such as needles, medical equipment, clothing, or bedding. This means that caregivers, family members, and healthcare workers are often the most at risk when proper protection is not available. Imagine trying to help a loved one who is sick without having gloves or protective equipment. That's how many people have been exposed during outbreaks. The virus can also jump from animals to humans. In many outbreaks, Ebola is believed to originate from contact with infected wildlife, especially fruit bats or primates. Handling or consuming bushmeat has been linked to the first human cases in some regions. This raises a bigger question. How many diseases do you think have crossed from animals to humans without us even realizing it at first? Another factor that has played a major role in spreading Ebola is close physical contact during traditional burial practices. In some cultures, family members wash and touch the body of the deceased as part of saying goodbye. Unfortunately, the virus can remain active in the body after death, making these moments of love and respect extremely dangerous in the context of Ebola. This shows how deeply cultural practices and health risks can intersect during outbreaks. So the real risk of Ebola comes from close, unprotected contact, not casual, everyday interaction. You don't get Ebola by walking past someone on the street or sharing the same air. Understanding this helps reduce unnecessary panic and focuses attention on what actually stops the spread: protective equipment, hygiene, early isolation of cases, and education. Knowing how Ebola spreads isn't just information. It's one of the most powerful tools we have to prevent outbreaks from growing. Why is Ebola so dangerous? Ebola is considered one of the most dangerous viruses in the world, not just because it can kill, but because of how fast it overwhelms the human body. Think about how your body usually fights infections. Your immune system has time to react, adapt, and recover. With Ebola, That window is brutally short. The virus spreads quickly through the bloodstream, attacking multiple systems at once before the body can mount an effective defense. Another reason Ebola is so dangerous is how violently the symptoms can escalate. What may start as fever, fatigue, and muscle pain can rapidly turn into severe vomiting, diarrhea, internal bleeding, and organ failure. This sudden progression makes it difficult for patients to receive timely treatment, especially in regions where access to hospitals and advanced care is limited. Imagine how terrifying it must be to feel your condition worsen day by day, with little medical support available. Ebola also disrupts the body's ability to regulate fluids and blood clotting. Massive fluid loss from vomiting and diarrhea can lead to dehydration and shock, while damage to blood vessels can cause bleeding both inside and outside the body. When vital organs like the liver and kidneys begin to fail, the body reaches a critical point where survival becomes extremely difficult without intensive medical intervention. This combination of dehydration, bleeding, and organ failure is what makes Ebola so deadly. The danger isn't only physical, it's also social and psychological. Fear of Ebola can cause people to hide symptoms, avoid treatment centers, or distrust healthcare workers. In past outbreaks, misinformation and fear delayed care and allowed the virus to spread further. Have you ever thought about how fear itself can become part of the disease? When people are afraid to seek help, the virus gains more time to spread and do damage. Finally, Ebola is dangerous because it tends to strike hardest where healthcare systems are already under strain. Limited access to protective equipment, clean facilities, and trained professionals means outbreaks can spiral out of control more easily. This isn't just a problem for one region of the world. In a connected global society, uncontrolled outbreaks anywhere can become a risk everywhere. Understanding why Ebola is so dangerous helps shift the focus from panic to preparedness. And preparedness saves lives. Real risk for you perspective. When people hear about Ebola, it's easy to feel like the threat is immediate and personal. The images shown in the media can be intense, and headlines often focus on worst-case scenarios. But let's put this into perspective for a moment. For the vast majority of people watching this video, the actual risk of ever encountering Ebola is extremely low. Have you ever met someone who personally knew a person with Ebola? Most people haven't, and that already tells you something about how rare direct exposure really is. Ebola outbreaks tend to be geographically limited and closely monitored by health organizations around the world. When cases appear, rapid response teams, contact tracing, and isolation measures are put in place to contain the spread. This means that even when outbreaks occur, they are not random or uncontrolled in most cases. So while Ebola is deadly, it is not something spreading silently through everyday life in most countries. For people who live outside outbreak regions, the main risk is not casual contact, but exposure through very specific situations, such as working in healthcare, humanitarian aid, or traveling to affected areas during an outbreak. Even in these cases, strict safety protocols exist to reduce risk. This raises an important question. How often are we afraid of threats that are statistically far less likely than the everyday risks we rarely think about? That said, low personal risk does not mean zero global risk. In a connected world, diseases can travel with people, and fragile healthcare systems can allow outbreaks to grow before they are detected. This is why international monitoring, early warning systems, and global cooperation matter. The lesson here isn't to be afraid. It's to understand that protecting public health anywhere helps protect people everywhere. So the real risk for you is not Ebola itself, but misinformation and panic. Fear without understanding can lead to stigma, discrimination, and bad decisions. Knowledge, on the other hand, leads to preparedness and empathy. When you understand a real level of risk, you can stay informed without living in fear, and that balance is what truly protects individuals and communities. Ebola is one of the deadliest viruses known to science, but it's also one of the most studied and monitored today. Understanding how it spreads, how it harms the body, and how outbreaks are controlled helps prevent fear from turning into misinformation. If you want to learn about real-world threats most people never talk about, hit subscribe. In the next video, we'll explore another rare virus scientists are watching closely, one that jumps from animals to humans.